my own way.
Of course, Mr. Owen.
The story started, and they... Well, I took to the idea about as well as a chicken takes to water. I'm not obliged to sell. We sell. By gum, I'll stand on my constitutional rights. You know, just saying that made me think. Do I really know what my constitutional rights are? Do I really know what the Constitution is?
But the Constitution dates back...
I'm surprised how our Constitution, old as it is, fits in with your story, the airport. That's how I came to get a copy and put it up there where Aunt Millie's painting used to hang. I guess you know what the written... First, there's the preamble. We the people. And, well, you know. Then Article 1 sets up a Congress, the legislative branch of our federal government.
Sure. And Article 2 provides for the executive branch. And Article 3 for the judicial branch. We've studied that.
Those 3 articles define our federal government.
Now...
But remember, the federal government was established by the states getting together and delegating certain powers to it. Other powers they reserve to themselves. So we have Article 4, which deals with the relation of the states. So there we have a federal system with both central and state governments, and both of them are limited in their powers. But from there on out, the Constitution has done a lot of growing. Article 5, which provides for amending the Constitution, shows that the men who wrote it expected it to change. Take a look at the amendments.
I know. The first 10 are called the Bill of Rights.
That's where I get those constitutional rights I was standing on. According to the 5th Amendment, my property couldn't be taken away from me without due process of law. Not even for an airport, see? I told you this is part of your airport story. But the Civic Committee had their constitutional rights, too. Under the First Amendment, they staged a couple of mass meetings to stir up interest in their project for a county airport. So the issue was put to a vote as a referendum question on the ballot for the next county election. Before the election, there was a lot of campaigning, especially by the women of the Civic Committee. Time was in this country when only men could vote. But when the people decided that women should vote too, they up and changed the Constitution to suit themselves. That's one of the later amendments. Then again, sometimes we the people change our minds. In 1919, we wrote prohibition into the Constitution. In 1933, we wrote it out, which goes to show that when all is said and done, the Constitution at any time is what the people want it to be at that time.
But about the airport referendum, when the votes were counted...
A while ago, you asked how a document written in 1787 could have anything to do with an airport. Well, son, you've got to stop thinking about the Constitution as just a written document, changed only by written amendments. For instance, you know that the written Constitution gives Congress the power to regulate interstate commerce.
Yes, sir.
Well, back in the early days of our republic, commerce had to do with horse-drawn vehicles and boats. But times have changed, and so has the Constitution. It's been changed through interpretation of the word commerce to include trains and trucks and buses and, as I said, airplanes. It's changed enough so that under the Constitution, Congress created a special agency to control commerce of the air. And you'll be interested to know it was this agency that the members of the Civic Committee consulted about choosing the site for the airport and laying it out and getting federal aid in financing it. Anyhow, that shows you how the Constitution changes to keep up with the times without anything new being written into it. Well, take the Department of Agriculture, for instance, and some of its agencies. They give us farmers a lot of help. But do you think the Department of Agriculture is provided for in the written Constitution?
No, sir. It was created by act of Congress.
That's right. Through interpretation of its constitutional powers, Congress has created a flock of departments, agencies, bureaus, and commissions, and passed hundreds of laws. And when you come right down to it, all these are additional parts of our Constitution. And then the executive department of our government is also forever changing the Constitution and adding to it by interpreting the presidential powers. and by issuing executive orders that have the force of law. And our Supreme Court and the lower courts decide hundreds of cases every day. These decisions are especially important in interpreting and modifying the Constitution. Finally, you come back to we the people. We have the last say as to what our Constitution will be.
But speaking of courts, Mr. Owen, didn't you end up in some sort of a court battle over taking your land for the airport?
Not exactly, but you're one step ahead of me. I told you about the referendum question getting on the ballot. Well, it stirred up quite a rumpus. Both major political parties made an issue of the airport. There's an example of still another way the Constitution changes, through custom and usage. The written Constitution says nothing about political parties, not even a mention. But just the same, political parties have come to be an essential part of the way our system of government operates. And the same is true of the President's cabinet. It grew out of custom and usage. Well, I wasn't very pleased at the way the election was shaping up. And I was a lot less pleased at the way it turned out. The news came to me along with another visit from the Civic Committee. They asked whether now I was ready to sell my land. My answer was still no. They said this was too big a matter to be blocked by stubborn, selfish interest. Stubborn, they called it, for a man to want to hold on to what was rightfully his. Then they told me mine was the only land the Civil Aeronautics Administration would approve. If I wouldn't sell, they'd have my property condemned for the public good. That night, I took advantage of my right of free speech. I wrote a letter to the editor of the Star, my good friend, Dick Bradford.
I appreciate your position, John. Of course, I'll print your letter in the next issue. But in the same issue, I'm going to run this letter. It's addressed to the people of Greene County from the president of Federal Airlines. Our company has followed with keen interest the progress you have made toward establishment of a county airport. For some time, as you know, we have planned to use the airport to provide passenger and cargo service for the people in the area. The farmers in particular would profit through the opening up to them of new markets for their produce. But now it appears that one of your farmers is so lacking in vision that by his stubbornness he will delay the airport project indefinitely.
But it isn't stubbornness, Dick, it's just...
I'm only reading this. The loss to the people of Greene County can easily amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, but that is not our concern. Now, inasmuch as we have been approached by your neighbors in Montgomery County...
Montgomery County?
We intend to lend them our support in the establishment of an airport, which...
Operator. Harriet, get me the president of the, Federal Airlines. Well, how do I know? New York or Chicago or someplace? You see, it was for the good of the majority. And I got a fair price for my land, too. And I've still got my house and enough land on this side of the highway to keep me busy. Come here, Frank.
Mm-hmm.
There's one of the big birds, a real thoroughbred. Just think, more than 100 years ago, my grandfather plowed that land with a team of oxen. That's progress. And 100 years from now, when that kind of airplane is old-fashioned, our country will still be thriving under our living Constitution.